Deep inside a windowless bunker in the Nevada desert, an American pilot stares at a monitor that has suddenly gone dead. Just seconds ago, it displayed a crisp, live feed from 40,000 feet above the Middle East, broadcast by a $30 million MQ-9 Reaper drone. For 2 decades, these silent, unblinking machines owned the skies, serving as the undisputed apex predators of American military supremacy. But today, a locally made Iranian surface-to-air missile streaked into the stratosphere and shattered that illusion in a blinding flash. We are standing on the edge of a precipice. The world is mesmerized by the violent tit-for-tat playing out between the United States, Israel, and Iran. Through the lens of the nightly news, the downing of a $30 million drone looks like a contained, distant skirmish. But that comfort is a fatal misconception. What we are witnessing is not just the destruction of taxpayer-funded hardware in the desert, it is the real-time collapse of American global dominance. The chilling truth is that Washington is pursuing a reckless, unilateral set of policies that actively destroys our ability to project power across the globe. By discarding our allies, shattering international law, and blindly following Israel into an unwinnable war of attrition, the United States is pushing the entire international economy toward the abyss. This is the story of how the greatest superpower in human history began to systematically dismantle its own empire, and why the next missile fired might just crash the entire world order. There is a seductive illusion currently driving American foreign policy. It is the belief that the United States is totally independent of the Middle East, that we do not need their oil, and most dangerously, that we do not need our allies. The current administration operates under the assumption that America can walk through the world as a single, untethered actor. But to argue that we are independent of these vital strategic areas is a fundamentally foolish argument. The raw power of the United States rests on its massive wealth and population size. Yet those material capabilities alone are not enough to rule the globe. To actually project that immense power across the planet, a superpower desperately needs 3 pillars: international institutions, international law, and deep relationships with allies. Historically, the United States suffered a devastating defeat in the Vietnam War, yet our fundamental balance of power remained perfectly intact because our core material wealth survived. Today, however, the threat to American dominance is entirely self-inflicted. The current administration acts as a unilateralist force, taking a wrecking ball to the very global order America built. By actively undermining NATO, showing contempt for international courts, and treating long-standing allies worse than actual adversaries, Washington is severing its own global reach. You simply cannot project power all across the globe without allies. When a superpower starts slapping its partners around and discarding the laws it wrote, it does not become stronger. It becomes an isolated giant with its hands tied, stumbling blindly into a well of terrifying trouble. To understand how the United States walked into this trap, we have to dismantle a carefully constructed myth. For years, politicians in Washington and Tel Aviv have sold the American public a terrifying narrative. We are told over and over that Iran is a great destabilizer in the Middle East and a severe existential threat to the United States. The media relentlessly portrays them as the undisputed architects of regional chaos. But a cold, hard look at history reveals a completely different reality. The argument that Iran is the primary engine of instability is absolute nonsense. As best as analysts can tell, Iran has not actually started a war in centuries. They are a deeply strategic actor, not a highly aggressive country looking to conquer its neighbors. While it is undeniably true that Iran presents specific regional problems that the United States has to be concerned about, elevating them to an existential threat is simply not a serious argument. The chilling truth is that the greatest threat to stability in the Middle East is not sitting in Tehran. The real danger is the United States working closely together with Israel. The world watched as the United States and Israel launched unprovoked attacks against Iran, first in June of 2025 and again on February 28th of this year. We are the ones crossing borders and dropping bombs. By painting Iran as a monstrous enemy, American leaders have manufactured a ghost story. It is a myth designed to blind the public to the terrifying fact that we are the ones lighting matches in a room full of gasoline. If Iran is not the boogeyman, Who is actually driving the chaos? The answer is deeply uncomfortable for many Americans to acknowledge. For decades, the public has been conditioned to view Israel's military actions strictly through the lens of righteous self-defense. We are told they are a besieged nation merely protecting their borders from hostile neighbors. But the grim reality on the ground tells a much darker story. Right now, Israel is fighting a relentless, multi-front war of its own making. They are pursuing a devastating campaign in Gaza that top political scientists classify as a genocide. They are launching daily pogroms in the West Bank, actively displacing populations. In the north, they are bogged down in a grueling ground war in southern Lebanon, suffering repeated tactical defeats at the hands of Hezbollah while continuously dropping bombs on Syria. Most dangerously for the American public, they have actively dragged the United States military into a direct, unprovoked conflict with Iran. When you look at this staggering map of violence, one could easily make the argument that Israel is by far the most aggressive state in the Middle East and perhaps on the entire planet. True alliance requires mutual benefit and regional stability. It does not mean handing over a blank check, signed with American credibility and funded by American taxpayers, to bankroll the extreme military adventures of a foreign power. By unconditionally backing this staggering level of aggression, the United States is rapidly destroying its own moral standing and dragging our citizens into an unwinnable quagmire. Washington and Tel Aviv operated under a catastrophic delusion. The tag team believed they could execute a rapid shock and awe campaign against Iran. War planners assumed that a precise decapitation strike would instantly shatter the Iranian leadership and spark a sudden civilian revolution. The deeply flawed assumption was that overwhelming American technological superiority would guarantee a quick and decisive victory. They firmly believed the regime would simply collapse and surrender in a matter of days. They were disastrously wrong. The grand shock and awe strategy failed completely. Instead of a swift triumph, the United States now finds itself trapped in a grinding, inescapable war of attrition. This is a fatal miscalculation that military strategists have repeated for decades. Look closely at the unfolding battlefield. At the end of 2025, the public was confidently told that Hezbollah had been completely defanged, their vast rocket arsenals supposedly turned to ash by Israeli airstrikes. Yet today, they are heavily coordinating with Iran and firing missiles deep into Tel Aviv on a daily basis. The enemy was not broken, they were simply adapting. In a brutal war of attrition fought thousands of miles from home, advanced stealth jets and multi-million-dollar bombs cannot compensate for raw geographic advantage and relentless patience. The United States has stumbled blindly into a deadly trap. By attempting to force a regime change through sudden violence, Washington has locked itself into a protracted conflict where the adversary is perfectly willing to bleed us out. In this devastating new reality, the Iranians hold almost all the cards, and the United States is rapidly running out of viable options. While bombs fall in the Middle East, the true threat to the American public is quietly waiting in a narrow strip of water. War planners across the political spectrum fully expected that Iran would shut down and use the Strait of Hormuz as a global choke point. This crucial shipping lane is not just a geographical feature, it is essentially Iran's nuclear bomb. The president was explicitly forewarned that the Iranians were likely to shut down the strait, yet he brazenly declared that it did not matter. The administration gambled the global economy on the dangerous fantasy of a quick and decisive victory. But because that rapid victory catastrophically failed, the conflict has devolved into a grueling war of attrition where the Iranians hold almost all the cards. By choking off one of the most vital energy arteries on the planet, they have the unprecedented power to crash the international economy as a result of this war. This is not a distant political problem. This is an economic doomsday device aimed directly at the American taxpayer. The shockwave of a closed strait will trigger massive inflation, hitting every gas pump and grocery store across the United States. We are currently standing on the edge of the precipice in terms of the state of the world economy. By backing a sovereign nation into a corner with absolute disregard for global supply lines, Washington has handed its adversary the detonator to a financial catastrophe that will have devastating consequences for every state on the planet. The chorus of voices demanding escalation is not just coming from Washington and Tel Aviv. It is echoing from the wealthy capitals of the Persian Gulf. Leaders in the UAE and Saudi Arabia have indicated they want the United States to go full bore, finishing the war and defeating Iran once and for all. But this demand is a staggering act of strategic suicide. First of all, the United States is simply not going to defeat Iran once and for all. If Washington actually marches up that escalation ladder as these allies request, there is a very good chance that the UAE and Saudi Arabia will be completely destroyed as functioning societies. These desert nations depend heavily on desalinated water to survive. There are only a handful of desalination plants in each country, sitting directly in the line of fire as big fat targets. Furthermore, the Iranians can easily go after their massive oil and energy infrastructure, essentially destroying those countries overnight. The Iranians have been playing tit for tat all along, and they have made it perfectly clear that if the United States broadens its attacks, they will attempt to destroy countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The Gulf states had absolutely no interest in seeing this war start, and they have no interest in seeing it continue. They should be telling the Americans to back off and working overtime to reach a negotiated settlement. Instead, the loudest voices pushing America to up the ante are living in fragile glass houses, blindly demanding a brutal escalation that they physically cannot survive. While the United States bleeds treasure and credibility in the Middle East, its greatest global rival is quietly watching from Beijing. Washington has repeatedly declared that its principal mission is to pivot to Asia and contain the rising power of China. But instead of focusing on the Pacific, the American military has ensnared itself in a chaotic war in the Persian Gulf. For Chinese leadership, this disastrous distraction is absolute manna from heaven. The United States is actively dismantling its own containment strategy. Vital defense assets, including Patriot and THAAD missile batteries, are being pulled directly out of East Asia. Highly trained Marine expeditionary units are being hastily relocated from Japan and thrown into the Middle Eastern fire. We are stripping our defenses in the exact region where our true near-peer adversary is rapidly expanding its reach. Furthermore, China is winning the ultimate battle for global influence without firing a single shot. While the United States drops multi-million-dollar bombs and threatens to drag the international economy off a cliff, Beijing is stepping forward to claim the diplomatic high ground. To the rest of the watching world, the Chinese look like the adults in the room. They appear as the responsible stakeholder in the international system, while American foreign policy looks increasingly erratic and destructive. By sacrificing our strategic focus to fight an unwinnable war of attrition, Washington is abandoning its most crucial geopolitical theater. The United States is voluntarily handing global supremacy to China on a silver platter, proving that you do not need to defeat an empire if you can simply convince it to destroy itself. The diplomatic fallout of this unilateral aggression extends far beyond the borders of the Middle East. Step outside the echo chamber of Washington and look at how the rest of the globe actually views the United States right now. Our closest partners in Europe, our strategic allies in Asia, and the wealthy Gulf states are all watching in absolute disbelief. They are actively questioning whether the United States is still playing with a full deck. For decades, the world relied on American leadership to act as the stabilizing anchor of the international system. Now they are watching the supposed guarantor of global security behave like an unpredictable rogue superpower. Our allies fully understand that by recklessly escalating this war, Washington is threatening to drive the entire international economy off a cliff. They know that an American miscalculation in the Persian Gulf will have devastating consequences for every single state on the planet. Darcy, the United States no longer looks like a responsible stakeholder. Instead of fostering stability, we are actively dismantling the international law and multilateral institutions that once kept the world turning. The global community is terrified of a superpower that has abandoned diplomacy for brute force, choosing to blindly protect an aggressive ally even as it drags us toward an unwinnable conflict. The trust that took generations of American diplomacy to build has rapidly evaporated. The world is no longer looking to America for leadership and protection. They are looking at us with deep, undeniable fear. We have reached the absolute edge of the precipice. The United States is not losing its raw military strength, but it is actively destroying its own global leadership and moral authority. By blindly shackling American foreign policy to an aggressive, multi-front war in the Middle East, Washington has isolated itself from the very international community it once built. The tag team of the United States and Israel is standing alone, dragging the global economy toward a devastating collapse while the rest of the world watches in terror. Now, a fundamental choice stands before the American public. Is funding an endless, unwinnable war of attrition worth the absolute destruction of our own economic stability? Are we willing to sacrifice the financial security of our own families, knowing that a closed maritime choke point will send devastating shockwaves through every city in the country? And most importantly, are we willing to quietly hand over our status as the premier global superpower to China, all to protect a single, highly aggressive ally? Tell me exactly what you think in the comments below. I read every single one. We must decide if we want to remain a responsible stakeholder or if we are content watching our empire crumble from the inside out. If you want to understand what happens next as this massive shift in global power accelerates, make sure you subscribe, because in the next video, we are leaving the Middle East behind to expose the silent, terrifying moves Beijing is making right now in the South China Sea. While Washington is completely distracted by the desert, the real battle for the 21st century has already begun.